The Haiku, a short lecture by Tim Kelly. The haiku is a Japanese poetic form whose origins exist in the longer renga form, going back to the medieval period. The most famous exponent was the 17th century poet Matsuo Basho, and his most famous haiku is called Old Pond. You can see it written here in the middle of the slide, the long single line of kanji, or Japanese logograms, running down the page. It goes like this.
古い毛や蛙飛び込む水の音
If you can't read kanji, Japanese does have a couple of syllabic scripts, and you can see the poem written in 3 lines of hiragana. It goes like this. Furu ike ya kawazu tobikomu mizo no oto. And if, as I imagine, you can't read that, then it also has a romanized system, and I think you'll be able to understand these much better. Furu ike ya kawazu tobikomu mizo no oto. Now, before I go on to the English translation, note that I've written a number next to each line, and these correspond to the number of Japanese on in each line. On is often translated as syllable in English, though it's not exactly the same. Nevertheless, the fact that there are 5, then 7, then 5, making 17 on to a Japanese haiku, was one of the features that came into the writing of haikus in English, with the 575 corresponding to the number of syllables in the English version. However, let's look at a fairly literal translation of Basho's poem. Old pond, a frog leaps in, water's sound. Now you might be thinking there's not much to it, and in one sense there isn't. However, what you have got, which are traditional features of the haiku, are a theme around nature and a strong image at the centre. In this case, a multi-sensual image, the frog jumping and the splash of the water. Or, as the sound isn't specified, perhaps the aftermath of the gentle lapping of the ripples. And the Japanese word tobikomu has the sense of immersion, perhaps the dull and intimate echo of being submerged in water. Anyway, you can see it's short, simple, clear, and I think sensorially impressive, if perhaps not stunning. Now, I used to teach in Japan at a university in Kyoto in the 1990s, and a few years ago I was invited on a trip with an ex-colleague, an American professor of literature, who took me out to Ueno, Basho's hometown. And we visited Ueno Castle, and in the grounds there's a little museum dedicated to Basho. And here I saw some of the original scrolls of Basho's poems, which, as you can see, are vertical scrolls of calligraphic writing. We also visited Basho's house and went into his study. You can see the writing table on the tatami mat floor. And I even got a picture of Basho's bog. Now, if you just indulge me a moment longer, when I got back from Japan, I went out walking with a friend, and we went from Leamington to Warwick along the canal. And if you look at the far right of the bridge, you'll see some writing. As I got closer, I saw this. And just to make it clearer, I reprocessed the image. An old silent pond. A frog jumps into the pond. Splash. Silence again. And if you didn't recognize it, the writer is credited, Matsuo Basho. And if you count the syllables, you see we have an old silent pond. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A frog jumps into the pond. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Splash, silence again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's a perfectly formed translation in English of Basho's poem. Now, I couldn't help thinking what an amazing coincidence this was, having been in Ueno a week earlier. And I also couldn't help but reflect that they're so posh in Royal Leamington Spa that even the graffiti writers compose perfectly formed haikus. So, on to the haiku in English. These are composed of 3 lines with a total of 17 syllables, with the first line having 5 syllables, the second 7 syllables, and the third 5 syllables. A key thing to note is that whilst there is a syllabic count, it is an image rather than meter or rhyme that is the essence of this form, though sound as image rather than rhythm can be important. And note that there are strict and loose form of haiku in both the Japanese and English, so there are short image-based poems that the authors might call haikus that do not follow the strict syllabic count. Here's a couple of mine. Artist. Painting the sadness in his soul out on canvas, purple hues and blue. Husband. Painting the sickness in his soul on her body, blood red, black and blue. These are strict form haikus, and note that the title gives an extra possible dimension to the poem, whether it be simply thematic or indeed works in contrast to the poem's content. And whilst individual haikus should be able to stand alone, it's often the relationship between 2 or more poems that is interesting, or indeed can offer a dialectical tension, adding layers of meaning or indeed irony. Here's a famous loose form haiku, or imagist poem, from the brilliant but lunatic and sadly fascist poet Ezra Pound. The apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. You'll notice that this does not have 3 lines nor 17 syllables, but what it does have is a stunning image at its centre. Hence, it's often referred to as a loose form haiku. If you decide to write a haiku, my advice would be to experiment with the strict form, observing the exact number of syllables per line. You can practice this by changing any sentence into a haiku. You can practice this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by changing any sentence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 into a haiku 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Count the syllables on your fingers and try to find a powerful image to center your poem around so it transforms from the prosaic into the poetic. And studiously avoid rhymes and metrical beats, as these sit uneasily in the haiku.